Hi there, I'm the Reverend Danny Crosby, a Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and in Urmston in the northwest of England, and I offer this devotion as a balm for the heart, for the mind, for the spirit, and for the soul. And it's titled, Let It Show, Living in the Multitude of Layers and Contradictions. I have always been fascinated by folk, by our complexities, really. No life is two dimensional. We contain multitudes of layers that make our human personalities, make us who we are. People constantly surprise me. Truth be told, I surprise myself, actually. Really do. From a young age, I spent most of my time watching and listening while others were actually being off doing what they were, being who they were, expressing themselves. And even now, when I'm in a group of people, I found myself mainly caught up listening to all these conversations going on all around me. It can be quite tricky actually because my ears tune into everything. It's the way I'm made, which in some ways is a good thing. It's a blessing in the fact of my work, I guess. It can be a curse though, because it can be hard sometimes to just listen to one person when you're in a group. My ears just tune into everything. Been like that all my life. It ain't changing. Most people are surprised to hear me say that I spend most of my life silent, actually, not speaking. Even when I'm in company, my ears are far more engaged than my mouth. This is who I actually am. And yet my public persona is not this. And I think people perceive me as someone who has an awful lot to say. But I'm not, It's not who I am. Maybe it's the paradox of me, of my humanity, who knows? But then again, there are many, many layers to each of our humanities, I guess. Everyone contains multitudes of contradictions, to badly misquote Walt Whitman, the wonderful Walt Whitman. Again, a man who contained multitudes. Our inner and outer persona do not always align, at least not to the casual observer. Anna Arendt observed, nothing and nobody exists in this world whose very being does not presuppose a spectator. For each of us, there is a public persona encasing the private person, an aspirational self radiating from the real self. Love that word, radiating. We each have a public face that we show the world, and then there is the inner person, which no one truly knows. We think we know each other, but in many ways we don't, not the many complexities of our humanity. This is often true of public figures who we are given a sanitized view of, more and more so actually, but it isn't their real self. I've noticed it actually with footballers in the modern age when they're interviewed. They kind of give a rehearsed, cliched response, often saying as little as possible, actually, probably for the fear of being misunderstood. So they're kind of trained to not really say anything, really. They may as well not bother. Occasionally it seeps through, of course, isn't it? What we'd like to see is the real person. I'm sure we would all like to see the real person beneath the public persona. But we rarely get to see the whole of anyone, actually. We, all of us, wear our masks, do we not? And I've been thinking about this actually, because I've been thinking about my time when I was a ministry student, sorry, at Macclesfield, um, under the loving care of the Reverend Michael Dadson. What a wonderful man he was. It is a strange thing stepping into an unknown congregation. I've been thinking about this with having Peter, the student, with us, or in Peter's case, two congregations actually. It took me quite some time to find my voice when I was a ministry student, to be my whole self, my real self, to be authentically myself, to show anything of me took some time, actually. And I do remember this being noted by members of the congregation, and how at the time when I began to speak more freely and openly, showing myself how much they appreciated getting to know the real me. Can you see the real me? Can you? Can you? I have learned, if I've learned anything in my ministry, it is that the most personal is often the most universal, for it allows others to identify. It puts flesh on the word, actually, and the word you speak. It's perhaps one of the most valuable lessons of my ministry, actually. I think that over time the masks did begin to slowly be removed, and the person leading was closer to the real person. They got to see the man behind the mask, which I think they've been longing for all the time, actually. Now, what's interesting is I observed that Michael, the minister, rarely revealed anything of himself. He was kind of almost, his style was to stand back and let others do that. But that was him. That's who he was, and that's who he was in his role. We're not here to mimic, and Peter will not mimic me. I hope he doesn't anyway, because he'd be rubbish at being me, just as I would have been rubbish at being Michael. But we're here to learn from one another. And the role is to become who we really are, isn't it? It's, as Michael, in a wonderful reading I once read of his, it's important that we let who we are show who we are, show our true selves, let it show. Not talk about who we are or be and pretend to be something, to let it show who we really are. And in doing so, we encourage others to do the same. Now, I've been thinking of masks quite a bit recently, actually, and I was reminded of a terrifying children's character the other day, Noseybonk, or Mr. Noseybonk, as he was later called, which comes from a children's television series of the late 1970s and early 1980s called Jigsaw, however you pronounce it. It was on when I was probably at primary school. It was quite odd, like a lot of children's television then was, I think, and Mr. Noseybonk actually was quite a terrifying character, actually, in like a dinner suit with this big white mask, a very long nose, and in the name Noseybonk, and actually reminded me a little of the character from A Clockwork Orange. His mask, although not as obviously terrifying, was not that different from Alex Droog, the character Alex Droog in that horrible scene, who was played by Malcolm McDowell. I don't know if Mr. Noseybonk, the point of him was to scare children, but most of my contemporaries that I speak to about were terrified of him, actually. In fact, they didn't like me. They can see the terror almost appear on their faces as I mentioned the character. And actually, the character, it would appear, having looked into this, has actually inspired some horror. It inspired, Noseybonk inspired the character Mr. Chuckleteeth, who was in an episode of The X-Files called Familiar. And then this, going on from Noseybonk, it's said was the inspiration behind the character Jigsaw from the horror movie franchise Saw, which I've never seen, by the way. I am certain that the inner workings that created the children's television program Jigsaw, they would never dream that they would end up down that rabbit hole of becoming Jigsaw, the character from the Saw movie franchise. But it would appear the links are there, or if they're not, it's a really weird coincidence. But it's suggested anyway that this is the case. That something so sinister would be hiding beneath the surface. But then again, I link Mr. Noseybonk back to the character from A Clockwork Orange, so who knows? He was pretty terrifying for most people. This strange character in a dinner suit with this big mask and a great big nose, who got his big nose into everything. Mr. Noseybonk, or Noseybonk. There are many layers, it seems, to everything. Innocent things can become something completely different, and the other way around too. And I've been thinking of layers, or layers as I pronounce it, which people miss here. Layers of things. And it brings to mind one of my favourite poems, actually. The poem The Layers. I'm going to say it deliberately like that so you don't mishear me. By Stanley Kunitz. And it's interesting, actually. The opening line is something I often misquote. I often say I've lived through many lives, some of them my own, but that's not actually the opening line. I need to read it more, don't I? Rather than just remember it or misremember it. Anyway, this is The Layers by Stanley Kunitz. I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. When I look behind, as I am compelled to look, before I can gather strength to proceed on my journey, I see the milestones dwindling toward the horizon, and the slow fires trailing from the abandoned campsites, over which scavenger angels wheel on heavy wings. Oh, I have made myself a tribe out of my true affections, and my tribe is scattered. How shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? In a rising wind, the manic dust of my friends, those who fell along the way, bitterly stings my face. Yet I turn exulting somewhat, with my will intact to go wherever I need to go, and every stone on the road precious to me. In my darkest night, when the moon was covered and I roamed through wreckage, a nimbus clouded voice directed me. Live in the layers, not on the litter. Though I lack the art to decipher it, no doubt the next chapter in my book of transformations is already written. I am not done with my changes. Live in the layers, not on the litter. There really is some beautiful wisdom here. There are many layers to explore in this incredible piece, written at the end of such an incredible long life and long career of a great poet. I've explored it before, of course I haven't. There are many layers to explore in this incredible poem. But here, it's the opening few lines that speak to me. Ones I often misquote, as I've said. I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. We ought never be afraid to let it show. We all wear masks that cover up aspects of ourselves and or reveal something that we're attempting to portray about ourselves. How often do we let the whole of ourselves be seen, though? How often do we let it show? We are a ball of complexity, of paradox and contradictions. To quote good old Walt Whitman, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Maybe this is the real you and me. There, the real you and me are to be found in the contradictions and the complexities of our humanity. It's what we actually have in common, I suspect, our multitude of contradictions, something that we all share in common. It's the one thing that we're all the same with, maybe. And yet we show our public faces. We wear our masks. There is nothing new under the sun. Including this very devotion, there is nothing new under the sun. And you know what? We've always worn masks. Ever since the beginning of human society, humans have worn masks. And the masks have depicted the multiple aspects of humanity. The many selves that lie within each and every one of us are multitudes, the layers of our lives. In the plays of ancient Greece, masks were worn and exchanged by the players to depict each individual's persona. The word persona itself is actually derived from personare, which meant to sound through, actually. It's not a visual thing. Because for it was not only the face of the character that was expressed through the very mask they wore, but it exaggerated, it altered their voice too. Not just the face, but the voice would change. Don't you think there's something beautifully powerful and moving in this? Isn't it a wonderful metaphor of who we are as human beings? In many ways, we can be identified as much by our voices as we are by our faces. So we can hide who we are as much as we can, but the voice will reveal the truth. I know from my experience of my life, when I truly find myself is when I find my voice. My authentic voice comes through. The real voice, the real me. I was talking with a friend again. I have this conversation often, actually, the other day about how my voice actually has just a bit like the poem The Layers, there's some part that remains, but to some degree it has altered over the years. And I don't just mean through the aging process. But to some degree, and those perhaps aren't without us trained in here, to some degree, my accent has softened, it has altered. Not completely, but to some degree, it's certainly, and no doubt it continues to do so. In fact, when I listen to things I did a few years ago, even I can hear that it's even from 6 years ago, it's softened. Now, no doubt, the fact that I have to speak publicly and be understood plays a big role in this. And also the fact that I've not lived in Yorkshire for 30 years. I think that has a big role, does it not? Now, when I was saying this to my friend, they laughed out loud at me at what I said, because to them, to their ear, I've got quite a strong accent, but I don't. It's just the odd vowel that pops through. Nothing like it used to be. It's probably a bit higher than it used to be either. I used to probably speak from deeper in my chest, because we do from where I'm from. I've not become a nasally Mancunian though, thank goodness. For me anyway, sorry, that sounds a bit rude, but I wouldn't want to sound like that. It's not who I am. But I've not deliberately changed, I've not intentionally changed the way that I speak. But nevertheless, it's happened incrementally over time. Some people, of course, and this is a real fascination of some people pick up accents a lot. I was talking with someone the other day, actually, who spent a large part of his childhood where I'm from. And yet, to me, he sounds like he's a well-spoken Scotsman, which is where he was born and where he spent the early part of his childhood. But to me, he sounds like somebody from Edinburgh, perhaps. But he spent his teenage years in Murfield, just down the road from where I'm from. But there is, to me, I can hear nothing. Now, to Scottish friends and relatives, they can hear the York, and he spent a lot of time in Manchester. But what I hear coming through is this kind of Edinburgh, kind of posh Scottish voice. Although he did say to me, he sounds like a slightly Camp Geordie. And when he said that, I thought, yeah, you do a little bit. That kind of soft northern kind of sound. Very funny, really. But it fascinates me how some people pick up accents very easily, and yet others hang on to theirs. They don't seem to be affected by moving around or the areas that they live in. But they probably are to some degree, but not to a degree that's noticeable. Some people will lose their accent almost immediately, or well, are like chameleons, they will mimic, which is how we learn to speak, of course. Fascinating how the complexity of humanity. So much of who we are, our persona, is caught up, though, in our voices, isn't it? Just as much as our facial features. In fact, it changes our voice. It changes the way our faces to some degree. Life will do that. I've noticed that in two twins that I knew, one who spent most of his life in England and one who remained in Australia. And the twin brother, the identical twin brother, came for his brother's wedding. And they didn't look the same. Even though they were identical, life had altered them in some way, their experience of life. And obviously their voices didn't sound exactly the same. But you only noticed it when they stood together. But they were identical twins, but they were not identical anymore. But so much of our character comes through our faces, but also our voices. So the masks we wear not only cover our faces, they cover our voices too, to some degree. We're no different from the ancient Greeks and those incredible plays. There is nothing new under the sun. We all contain many multitudes. Now, masks, of course, are not only the domain of ancient times. Many of our modern day heroes, they wear masks. In many ways, the hero has to wear a mask to protect his identity and therefore allow him to walk through life anonymously almost. For it seems that a hero cannot be a hero 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 and a bit days a year. The demands and the pressures of being a hero is too much for that. Think about Zorro, who has to don his mask in order to fight for his people. Think about Batman and Spider-Man, whose greatest fear is that they will be one day unmasked. There are many other examples too. Now, part of me doesn't like this idea of hiding who we are or having to be transformed into someone else to become a hero or to develop a completely different personality. There's a loneliness in it all, and I want to rebel against it. All those heroes, if you think about them, there was a loneliness about them. They had to walk alone. And they all had their dark sides. And they couldn't somehow completely show who they were. They had to hide their heroism behind a mask. Now, I was thinking of, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of a more extreme example. And actually, in a conversation about this morning, someone actually mentioned the character that I'm about to talk to. I didn't mention it. When I was talking about Noseybonk, they talked about another children's character that frightened them. And this is who I was going to talk about in the devotion now. As a child, I found scarecrows a bit haunting, a bit scary really, and a bit lonely. Don't know if you ever go to a town that have scarecrow festivals. It's like you're walking into a scene from The Wicker Man. It makes a place look quite spooky. It's a lovely thing to do, but I don't know. There's something a bit. I probably watched too many horror movies with scarecrows in as a child, probably. But there's something a bit frightening about these lonely figures that stare at the world as the world goes on, and they just stare out blankly, standing there upright, almost Christ-like, if you like, alone, looking at the world go by. Interesting. Not a pleasant image, really, a frightening, lonely image. But that, in some ways, is the superhero too. And usually the scarecrow is depicted in this way, but there is another, these semi-human creatures that can't quite fit in with the rest of us. But there was another scarecrow I had a deep affection for as a child. Again, some people found this character frightening. It haunted them through their childhood. And that's, of course, good old Wurzel Gummidge. It was aired around the same time as or at least the first series that I kind of fell in love with as a little boy. It was on at the same time as Jigsaw, the late 70s, early 80s. Do you remember Wurzel? Depends how old you are, really. Well, I loved Wurzel, but some of my friends found him a little bit scary. Not I. And like so many of these other characters, there's many children's characters, especially the slightly off-centre ones, they desperately wanted to fit in, to be accepted, to be a part of life. But no matter how hard Wurzel tried, he never managed to succeed to fit in. He was a bit like the Frank Spencer character, really, but as a scarecrow. Now, Wurzel didn't wear a mask, but he did something far more extreme than simply put a mask on his face. He had to painfully remove his head and replace it with another head to change his character to fit whatever occasion he found himself in. And again, a bit like Frank Spencer, poor old Wurzel, whatever he did, no matter how hard he tried, it always ended in complete and utter disaster. He could never quite be who he tried to be. He was always on the outside like a scarecrow is, looking at the world all alone. Not quite part of human life, not quite belonging. He wore a different head for every occasion, but it did not help him become who he wanted to be. Poor Wurzel. How many of us wear masks or put on different heads, if you like? People talk about changing. You can't change your head in our attempts to be accepted. But we find ourselves unacceptable, sadly, and that's the great sadness sometimes of human beings. Why do we believe we're not good enough just as we are, exactly as we are in this present moment, warts and all, but beauty spots too? Why do we believe we need to act differently around certain people just to be accepted, to fit in? Why do we think we need to wear different masks or even different heads or different hats, people say, don't they, for other occasions? Why do we think we need to change the way we speak to be accepted? I have a friend who grew up in a little town in Lancashire. And when he went away to university, within weeks, he'd completely lost his accent and sounded like a public school boy. And he did it because he felt ashamed of who he was. Sad, really, isn't it? I wouldn't have known until he told me. I just assumed he'd come from a completely different world, and he had not. Grew up in a little terraced house in Lancashire. Why can't we accept ourselves and the many layers with all our contradictions and all our complexities? Why must we hide who we are? Because it doesn't work, and it only leads to loneliness and emptiness as we try to be something we are not. And why doesn't it work? Well, because deep down we know it's not who we really are. We just remain scarecrows staring at the world as the world goes by. Perhaps commentating and criticising on the world, but stood apart, alone, and we don't need to. We can be who we are. We can come as we are, exactly as we are, but there is the capacity for change for everyone. I believe, this is just me, this is what I aspire to, but I often fall short from. I believe that authenticity, if you can say it, is really what's at the heart of the spiritual life. In fact, I would say that the purpose of the spiritual life is truly to become real, to let go of the masks that think we need to fit in and become acceptable to the world around us. We need to let that go. It's about letting who we truly are, the heart of our being, but we need to believe that at the heart of our being is a goodness. It's about letting that show, really. Letting our true nature show, not to believe that there's something wrong with us that we must hide. To let it show, to let the world see what's at the heart of our being, because in doing we encourage others to do the same. The purpose of the spiritual life is to become who we truly are. It is to remove the masks so that we can truly connect with all around us, with one another, to see who we truly are, to remove what we think hides the warts, but in so doing it hides the beauty spots too. It's about connecting to all that is, all that has been, all that will ever be, so that we live in this time and space and find rich meaning in everything, and we can be of purpose to the world in so doing. We can incarnate that love that is God through our human being and encourage others to do the same, and in so doing begin to build that kingdom of love, that commonwealth of love, where all are kin and all are accepted and acceptable through our humble lives. It's about removing the masks that shield and separate us and seeing one another as we truly are, face to face, and speaking our truth truly in love, not hiding the voice, trying to be something we are not. It's about truly living in the layers of our lives, to let that love truly show, to allow the many multitudes of our humanity to come alive, and in so doing, we'll encourage those we share our lives with to do the same too, to let it show. Let it show. We are here to let it show. Amen. So I'm going to end with some final words of blessing. You know, we all need to bless more, and we can all bless. And we bless when we give ourselves wholeheartedly to life. So let's return to our lives, and let's do so authentically. To be who we are, to let those masks fall from our faces, to live in the world as we truly are, alive and awake, to let the whole world know our hearts and souls, to let our hearts and our souls become incarnations of that kingdom of love, this commonwealth of love, where all are accepted as we are, exactly as we are. So let it show, let it shine, and let the blessings of God shine through our human being. And may we do so in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, in all that we do. Amen. Let it show. Amen.